Open your Bibles to today's Torah portion that begins at Genesis 25:19. Here is this history of Esau, Abraham's son. Abraham fathered Isaac. Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah, the daughter of Bethuel the Aramee from Padan Aram, and sister of Laban the Aramee, to be his wife. And Isaac prayed to Adonai on behalf of his wife because she was childless. Adonai heeded his prayer, and Rebekah became pregnant. And the children fought with each other inside her so much that she said, if it's going to be like this, why go on living? So she went to inquire of Adonai, who answered her, there are two nations in your womb, and from birth they will be two rival peoples. One of these peoples will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger. And when the time came for her delivery, there were twins in her womb. And the first to come out was reddish and covered all over with hair like a coat. So they named him Esau. Then his brother emerged, with his hand holding Esau's heel, so he was called Yaakov. Isaac was 60 years old when she bore them. Now the boys grew, and Esau was became a skillful hunter, an outdoorsman, and while Jacob, was a quiet man who stayed in the tents. Now Isaac favored Esau because he had a taste for game. Rivkah favored Yaakov. Now one day when Yaakov had cooked some stew, Esau came in from the open country exhausted. He said to Yaakov, please, let me gulp down some of that red stuff. I'm exhausted. This is why he was called Edom, red. And Yaakov answered, well, first, sell me your rights as the firstborn. Look, I'm about to die, said Esau. What use are my rights as firstborn? And Yaakov said, first, swear to me. So he swore to him, thus selling his birthright to Yaakov. Yaakov gave him bread and lentil stew, and he ate and drank and got up and went on his way. Thus Esau showed how little he valued his birthright. Now a famine came over the land, not the same as the first famine which had taken place when Abraham was alive. Isaac went down to Gerar to Avimelech, the king of the Philistines. And Adonai appeared to him and said, don't go down into Egypt, but live where I tell you. Stay in this land, and I will be with you and bless you, because I will give all these lands to you and to your descendants. I will fulfill the oath which I swore to Abraham your father. I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky. I'll give all these lands to your descendants. And by your descendants, all the nations of the earth will bless themselves. And all this is because Abraham heeded what I said and did what I told him to do. He followed my mitzvot, my command, my regulations, my teachings. So Isaac settled in Gerar, and the men of the place asked him about his wife. And out of fear, he said, she's my sister. Then he thought, if I tell them she's my wife, they might kill me in order to take Rebekah. After all, she's a beautiful woman. But one day, after he had lived there a long time, Abimelech, king of the Philistines, happened to be looking out the window when he spotted Isaac caressing Rebekah, his wife. And Abimelech summoned Isaac and said, so she's your wife after all. How come you said she's my sister? And Isaac responded, because I thought I could get killed because of her. Abimelech said, what is this you have done to us? One of the people could easily have slept with your wife, and you would have brought guilt on us. And then Abimelech warned all the people, whoever touches this man or his wife will certainly be put to death. Isaac planted crops in that land and reaped that year 100 times as much as he had sowed. Adonai had blessed him. The man became rich. He prospered more and more until he had become very wealthy indeed. He had flocks, cattle, a large household, and the Philistine envied him. Now the Philistine had stopped up and filled with dirt all the wells his father's servants had dug during the lifetime of Abraham his father. Abimelech said to Isaac, You must go away from us, because you have become much more powerful than we are. So Yitzhak left, set up camp in the Wadi Gerar, and lived there. Yitzhak reopened the wells which had been dug during the lifetime of Abraham his father, the ones the Philistine had stopped up after Abraham died, and he called them by the names his father had used for them. Yitzhak's servants dug in the wadi and uncovered a spring of running water. But the herdsmen of Gerar quarreled with Yitzhak's herdsmen, claiming, "That water's ours." So he called the well Esek, because they quarreled with him. They dug another well, quarreled over that one too. So he called it Sitnah. And he went away from there, and he dug another well, and over that one they did not quarrel. So he called it Rehovot. And he said, "Because now Adonai has made room for us, and we will be productive in the land." From there, Yitzhak went up to Beersheba. Adonai appeared to him that same night and said, "I am the God of Abraham your father. Don't be afraid, because I'm with you. I will bless you and increase your descendants for the sake of my servant Abraham." There he built an altar, and he called on the name of Adonai. He pitched his tent there, and Yitzhak's servants dug a well. Then Avimelech went to him from Gerar with his friend Achuzat and Pikol, the commander of his army. And Yitzhak said to them, "Why have you come to me, even though you were unfriendly to me and sent me away?" And they answered, "We saw very clearly that Adonai had been with you, so we said, 'Let there be an oath between us. Let's make a pact between ourselves and you, that you will not harm us, just as we have not caused you offense, but have done you nothing but good and sent you on your way in peace. Now you are blessed by Adonai.'" Yitzhak prepared a banquet for them. They ate and they drank, and the next morning they got up early and swore to each other. Then Yitzhak sent them on their way, and they left him peacefully. That very day, Yitzhak's servants came and told him about the well they had dug. "We have found water." So he called it Shiva, and for this reason the name of the city is Beersheba to this day. When Esau was 40 years old, he took his wives, Yehudut, the daughter of Beeri the Hittite, and Basmat, the daughter of Elon the Hittite. But they became a cause for embitterment of spirit to Yitzhak and Rivkah. In the course of time, after Yitzhak had grown old, his eyes dim, so that he couldn't see, he called Esau, his older son, and said to him, "My son?" And he answered, "Here I am." He said, "Look, I'm old now. I don't know when I will die. Therefore, please take your hunting gear, your quiver of arrows and your bow, get out in the country and get me some game. Make it tasty the way I like it and bring it to me to eat. Then I will bless you as firstborn before I die." Now Rivkah was listening to Yitzhak as he spoke this to his son Esau. So when Esau went out to the country to hunt for game and bring it back, she said to her son Yaakov, "Listen, I heard your father telling Esau, your brother, bring me game and make it tasty so I can eat it. Now pay attention to me, my son. Do what I tell you. Go to the flock, bring me back 2 choice kids. I will make it tasty to your father the way he likes it, and you will bring it to your father to eat so that he will give his blessing to you before his death." Now Yaakov answered Rivkah, his mother, "Look, Esau is hairy. I have smooth skin. Suppose my father touches me. He'll know I'm trying to trick him. I'll bring a curse on myself, not a blessing." But his mother said, "Let your curse be on me. Just listen to me and go get me the kids." So he went, got them, brought them to his mother, and his mother prepared them in the tasty way his father loved. Next, Rivkah took Esau, her older son's best clothes, which she had with her in the house, and put them on Yaakov, her younger son, and she put skins of the goats on his hands, on the smooth parts of his neck. And then she gave the tasty food and the bread she had prepared to her son Yaakov, and he went to his father and said, "My father." And he replied, "Here I am. Who are you, my son?" And Yaakov said to his father, "I am Esau, your firstborn. I've done what you asked me to do. Get up now, sit down, eat the game, and then give me your blessing." And Yitzhak said to his son, "How did you find it so quickly, my son?" And he answered, "Adonai, your God, made it happen that way." And Yitzhak said to Yaakov, "Come here close to me so I can touch you, my son, and know whether you are in fact my son Esau or not." Yaakov approached Esau his father, who touched him and said, "The voice is Yaakov's voice, but the hands are Esau's hands." However, he didn't detect him because his hands were hairy, like his brother's Esau's hands, so he gave him his blessing. And he asked, "Are you really my son Esau?" And he replied, "I am." And he said, "Bring it here to me, and I will eat my son's game so that I can give you my blessing." So he brought it up to him, and he ate. And he also brought him wine, and he drank. And then his father Yitzhak said to him, "Come close now and kiss me, my son." And he approached him and kissed him. And Yitzhak smelled his clothes. And he blessed Yaakov with these words, "See, my son smells like a field, which Adonai has blessed. So may God give you dew from heaven, the richness of the earth, and grain and wine in abundance. May people serve you and nations bow down to you. May you be Lord over your kinsmen. Let your mother's descendants bow down to you. Cursed be everyone who curses you. Blessed be everyone who blesses you." But as soon as Yitzhak had finished giving his blessing to Yaakov, when Yaakov had barely left his father's presence, Esau, his brother, came in from hunting. He too had prepared a tasty meal, brought it to his father, and now he said to his father, "Let my father get up and eat from his son's game so that you may give me your blessing." Yitzhak, his father, said to him, "Well, who are you?" And he answered, "I am your son, your firstborn Esau." Yitzhak began trembling uncontrollably. He said, "Well, then who was it that took game and brought it to me? I ate it all just before you came, and I give my blessing to him. That's the truth, and the blessing must stand." And when Esau heard his father's words, he burst into loud, bitter sobbing. "Well, Father, bless me too," he begged. And he replied, "Your brother came deceitfully and took away your blessing." Esau said, "His name, Yaakov, really suits him, because he has supplanted me these 2 times. He took away my birthright, and now he's taken away my blessing." Then he asked, "Haven't you saved a blessing for me?" Esau answered Esau, "Look, I've made him your lord. I've given him all kinsmen and servants, and I have given him grain and wine to sustain him. What else is there that I can do for you, my son?" And Esau said to his father, "Have you only one blessing, my father? Father, bless me too." Esau wept out loud, and Esau, his father, answered him, "Here, your home will be of the richness of the earth and the dew of heaven from above. You will live by your sword. You will serve your brother. But when you break loose, you will shake his yoke off your neck." Esau hated his brother because of the blessing his father had given him. Esau said to himself, "The time for mourning my father will come soon. Then I'll kill my brother Yaakov." But the words of Esau, her older son, were told to Rivkah. She sent for Yaakov, her younger son, and said to him, "Here, your brother Esau has comforted himself over you by planning to kill you. Therefore, my son, listen to me. Get up and escape to Laban, my brother, in Haran. Stay with him a little while until your brother's anger subsides. Your brother's anger will turn away from you. He will forget what you did to him. Then I'll send and bring you back from there. Why should I lose both of you on the same day?" Rivkah said to Yitzhak, "I'm sick to death of Hittite women. If Yaakov marries one of the Hittite women, like those who live here, my life won't be worth living." So Yitzhak called Yaakov, and after blessing him, charged him, "You are not to choose a wife from the Hittite woman. Go now to the home of Bethuel, your mother's father, and choose a wife there from the daughters of Laban, your mother's brother. May El Shaddai bless you, make you fruitful, and increase your descendants until they become a whole assembly of peoples. And may he give you the blessing which he gave Abraham, you and your descendants with you, so that you will possess the land you travel through, the land God gave to Abraham." So Yitzhak sent Yaakov away. He went to Padan Aram to Laban, son of Bethuel the Aramean, the brother of Rivkah, Yaakov's and Esau's mother. Now Esau saw that Yitzhak had blessed Yaakov and sent him away to Padan Aram to choose a wife from there, and that as he blessed him, as he charged him, "You are not to choose a Canaanite woman as your wife," and that Yaakov had listened to his father and mother and gone to Padan Aram. Esau also saw that the Canaanite women did not please Yitzhak his father, so Esau went to Ishmael and took, in addition to the wives he already had, Machlat, the daughter of Ishmael's, Abraham's son, the sister of Nabiot, to be his wife. Many years ago, a well-known Messianic Jewish rabbi in Israel showed me something interesting about the title to the story we just read. It is that the name given to this Torah portion is Tol'dot, and that Hebrew word has several meanings. The basic meanings are generations, genealogy, and history. Now, the Hebrew concept of history necessarily involves genealogy. It is very different from the typical Western secular concept of what history is. For the Hebrews, history is a chain of interlinking events, where one event leads to the next event, the first causing the second, and then so on. Now, events are connected, and never do they happen in isolation. The Western world finds this notion as too primitive and unintelligent to take it seriously. Therefore, history is but a series of mostly random events that sometimes can be orchestrated for a purpose by humans, and thus what happened in the past, while interesting, has no real usable value or influence on the now or on the future. The idea that history is a straight line, with each event standing independent of all others, is disproven by history itself. All things and events are connected. There is a beginning, Genesis. There is an ending, Revelation. Let's consider that thought in light of Matthew, the most Jewish, I believe, of all the Gospels, as he begins his Gospel based on Tol'dot, genealogy. Matthew 1:1, this is the genealogy of Yeshua the Messiah, son of David, son of Abraham. Now, not surprisingly, Matthew is actually taking his cue from Genesis, that also starts the history of man by citing genealogy. Genesis 5:1, here's the genealogy of Adam. On the day that God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. So, history is recited using genealogy as the framework. Now, the reason for this beginning used by the writer of Matthew is just in case someone would say that it's impossible for a virgin to have a son. See, Matthew reminds all that God created Adam and Eve without a natural mother or father. And if God can do this, a virgin can certainly have a son. And as an interesting tidbit to think about, I want to point out that in Genesis, what the Hebrew really says is Elohim created man. He made them in the likeness of Elohim. Now, I've explained in many previous writings and lessons that to translate Elohim to God, whether that's big G or little g, God, is an error. Elohim is not synonymous with Yah, the only Hebrew word that is rightly translated to God. Elohim is used in two ways in the Bible. The first way is as a title, one of several, for God the Father. The second way is as a proper name of a particular class of divine heavenly beings that was created to be the administrators over all the other classes of heavenly beings God created. This is biblical. This is not traditional. Adam and all humanity are, as says Genesis 5:1, modeled after the heavenly Elohim, not after God Almighty per se. In fact, Christianity has attempted all sorts of word gymnastics to try to explain how humans are models of God, when the Bible tells us we are nothing like Him or anything near Him. This concept that mankind is modeled after the Elohim is further proved in that earthly humans and the heavenly Elohim were given the same tasks. We are both to be administrators over the lesser creatures of our domains. The earth in one case, heaven in the other, that we occupy. And the only authority above us is the Father, God Himself. So in Genesis 1, God, in session with the divine council, speaks to the Elohim and says this: "Then God said, let us make humankind in our image, in the likeness of ourselves, and let them rule over the fish in the sea, the birds in the air, the animals, over all the earth, every crawling creature that crawls on the earth." With that as context, our Torah portion begins with Genesis 25:19 that presents to us the genealogy, the history of Isaac. Now here's the odd part. What is the first thing we learn in Isaac's genealogy? Yitzhak was 40 years old when he took Rivkah, the daughter of Bethuel the Aramean from Padan Aram, and sister of Laban the Aramean, to be his wife. And Yitzhak prayed to Adonai on behalf of his wife because she was childless. Adonai heeded his prayer, and Rivkah became pregnant. See, it's no coincidence that Sarah was barren, Rebekah was barren, and Rachel is barren. So many of the Bible patriarchs have been barren mothers and wives. But God intervenes, opens their womb, and they conceive a son. And it seems to me that because God is a God of patterns, that He is setting the stage for the most famous and consequential birth of all time. It will be a son of Abrahamic descent, impossibly born from a virgin, and He is coming to deliver a lost world, beginning with Israel. The Lord is preparing yet another step and stage of history for the ultimate king to be born in an impossible situation. His mother was a virgin. Now, from the very first covenant made to establish a separate group of people to serve God and to bring about His will for the redemption of humanity, starting with Abraham, each leader in that chain of biblical figures, as concerns the line of covenant promise, dealt with a problematic birth. The Bible does not deal in coincidences. So there's an important message here that we need to see from this undeniable pattern that it presents. God is telling us He is the author of life. Life is God's special gift that only He can provide. He gives it, He takes it, and He decides how that will happen. If He wants to override the natural, biological pattern and have a virgin conceive a son without the participation of a man, then He will. And He did. Isaac was born miraculously from a formerly dead womb. Jacob and his brother Esau were born from a formerly barren Rebekah. So it should not be doubted that God can and did bring His only begotten Son into this world by means of a virgin. Now, as today's Torah portion progresses, the story of Rebekah and Isaac unfolds, and what we ought not miss is that even in the super male-dominated Middle East of that era, the real force in this story is a woman, Rebekah. Isaac is considerably older than Rebekah, and she sees the world quite differently than her husband. Well, nothing new here between husbands and wives. Isaac thinks in terms of who will be the power and authority and owner of the family wealth when his days come to an end. Rebekah sees the future of her twin sons in relation to the fulfillment of God's promises to Abraham and Isaac. And in following her convictions, this has made Rebekah a somewhat controversial figure. Some, both Jew and Christian, judge her harshly as a woman who wrongly took action against her husband that she ought not have. Others don't see it that way because nowhere do we find that God condemns her. Now, the Lord God of Israel and the world is and can be extremely understanding when there are laws and rules that need to be bent for the greater good. But that greater good has to be about enacting His will and not our personal desires. Our God is full of grace and truth, long-suffering, and love. But above all, He wants His plan of redemption to be brought to fruition. In the Torah portion found in the book of Numbers, a fellow named Pinchas, also Phineas, he's a young and passionate priest from Aaron's family, and he took the law into his own hands. And without asking permission, he walks into a tent and thrusts a spear through Zimri and the princess of Moab for having sexual relations in public near the entrance to the Holy Tabernacle. God not only didn't condemn Pinchas for what he did, He gave him praise. Rebekah, too, is praised among the matriarchs for doing what was needed in order that God's will be carried out, even against her own husband's wishes and in some most difficult circumstances. Now, I'm not suggesting that one look for excuses to break God's law, or any law for that matter. However, there are unique times when the only way for God's intent and justice to be carried forward is through a great and selfless, even risky boldness, even being ready to accept the consequences from both man and God if need be. Whatever fault lay here in our story belongs to Isaac, not to his wife. Yes, our patriarchs were anything but perfect. Isaac was intent on having Esau be the torchbearer of the line of covenant promise, despite him knowing it was God's will that it be Jacob. I read a profound statement made by a great 19th century Jewish Christian scholar, and perhaps the man whose readings influenced me more than any other in my earliest journey in Hebrew roots. That's Alfred Edersheim. And he said this: if there is any point on which we should anxiously be on our guard, it is that of tempting God. We do so tempt the Lord when, listening to our own inclinations, we put once more to a question that which has already clearly settled. Where God has decided, never let us doubt nor lag behind. Isaac was attempting to do that. How often have we all suffered from clearly seeing God's requirement of us, but asking Him for another and different decision that better suits our personal desires, our plans, our agendas? And in doing this, Isaac created nothing but trouble. And of course, he still didn't get his way. The old, blind, sickly Isaac tells Esau to go hunt some meat as part of a commemorative meal that will be a necessary, customary part of a blessing Isaac wanted to bestow upon Esau. This was no wise what God had told Isaac through his wife, Rebekah, that was to occur. Now, had Isaac all those years ago simply decided to ignore what his wife told him, that Jacob was to be considered the firstborn, even though physically he came second, perhaps he was skeptical of it? Had he formed such a bond with Esau, he could not bear the thought of taking this all-important firstborn blessing from him, from his beloved son, knowing it would humiliate and crush him. Abraham suffered the same dilemma concerning his son Ishmael that was being denied in favor of Isaac. Or did he think, perhaps God would allow him to simply go his own way, rebel, and God would bless it anyway? After all, isn't God a God of love and mercy? And surely God wouldn't want to make anybody, Esau, for example, feel bad about themselves, would he? Well, after several years of study, reading the wonderful works of the great Hebrew sages of old, my conclusion about what was going on here has changed a little over time. It is interesting, is it not, that the matter of the birthright, that is, who would be Behor, the firstborn, that on the surface seems to be the main issue in the story, actually is not. Let me show you something that might give you a different perspective. I want you to look at verse 36, Genesis 27:36. Esau said, his name, Yaakov, really suits him because he has supplanted me these 2 times. He took away my birthright, and here now, he's taken away my blessing. Then he asked, haven't you saved a blessing for me? See, what we see is the issue of the birthright had already been resolved. Esau grudgingly acknowledges that the birthright now belongs to his brother Jacob. Reluctantly, Isaac also seems to have finally accepted the finality of it at some point before this scene. But how about the matter of the blessing? Well, a good study of biblical birthright and blessings shows that the two things aren't necessarily connected. The matter of the birthright is usually settled at the birth of the first boy child. Now, certainly, if that child should die, then it muddies the waters, but invariably, the second boy child would automatically gain the right his deceased brother held, and if the second boy child died, the third would gain the birthright, and so on. There would be no ceremony or ritual attached regarding birthright. So well was this idea of succession thoroughly embedded in both law and tradition of that era. So the traditional blessings bestowed upon the family near the end of the family leader's life meant something else. You know, it's not so much that at the end of the life of the current family leader that everyone waits breathlessly to see who will be the new family leader, but rather, what will the father bless each of his children with? Now, we need to understand that the firstborn didn't get everything, just the largest portion. The Bible calls it the double portion. And along with that double portion, he typically gets the right of leadership over the clan. Now, what amounted to a double portion undoubtedly varied depending on the situation. Double doesn't necessarily mean that the firstborn son gets precisely double of all of his brothers. This doesn't necessarily mean that an exact inventory of wealth was done to make sure that each got exactly their proper share. It could, probably did happen that way, particularly in later eras, but more often, these portions were necessarily approximates. A double portion could have been anything from a little bit more than the others to practically everything of value. It was all up to good old dad. So what we're witnessing here concerns only the blessing, not the decision about who's firstborn. And the blessing in this case is about dividing up wealth and the giving of territory. And just like for us today, probably since time immemorial for everyone, the inheriting children generally feel that if one gets more than the others, that means one was more loved than the others. Or if one gets less than the others, that means he or she is less valued than the others. We're told in verse 1 that Isaac was very old when he decided to perform the blessing, probably thinking that surely death was approaching. He was nearly blind. He was 137 years old at this time. 137. Now also realize that Jacob and Esau were in their mid to late 70s. Rebekah, the mother of these twin boys, overhears Isaac's instructions to the obviously delighted Esau, and she conspires to overturn Isaac's intentions. Esau was continuing to prove his unfitness to carry on the divine line that God had begun with Abraham. Rebekah was likely thinking if her dawdling old husband refused to carry out God's will, she'd have to, doing whatever it took, even if it included deception. I think this must be one of the most difficult parts of a believer's walk with God. Putting our full trust in Him to accomplish His will, even if at the moment all of our intellect and our senses and logic and notions of fairness and life experiences tells us it can't happen within the circumstances at hand. And so we're going to have to give it a nudge. On the other hand, we are here as God's instruments. We are here to be the ones to carry out His will. So it will necessarily involve us making choices, decisions. Sometimes none of them seem very good. I mean, this is the world. It isn't heaven. And the circumstances will rarely be nice and neat or perfectly clear. So Rebekah tells Jacob what's happening in his father's tent. He joins with her plan, not because he thinks what they are doing may be wrong, but rather because they might get discovered. Attaching goat skins to his arms and neck to imitate Esau's naturally hairy body, Jacob goes into his father's tent. Skeptical at first, Isaac senses tell him something's maybe not quite right. But Isaac is convinced enough that this is indeed Esau before him, so he pronounces his blessing of inheritance upon Jacob. Well, deed's done. Jacob has received the blessing God intended for him. He held on to the birthright God told his mother he was to have, and he received authority, the power to lead the clan. But no doubt Jacob felt none of that inner joy and sense of humility before God that should have been present after being anointed as the bearer of the divinely established line of covenant promise. Poor Jacob. I mean, he went through all these contortions and pulled off all of these hurtful deceptions only to receive that which never could have been denied him in any way, because Jehovah had already determined it. And all too often, that's what happens when we decide to help God, to help God out in ways that seem good to us, but are neither wise nor righteous. But now the other shoe drops. Esau arrives back from his successful hunt, prepares the meat, goes into his father's tent ready and eager to receive his inheritance blessing, figuring it will be the greater blessing than what Jacob gets. And a surprised Isaac knows immediately he's been duped. And although he feels for Esau, there is nothing that can be done for a blessing of this sort. Once given, it is irreversible for any reason. Esau did not go into the tent expecting to be named the firstborn. Esau simply wanted lots of wealth and power. He wanted the best of all his father owned. Really, he had already shown he didn't want the hassles. He didn't want the burdens associated with being the firstborn. He just wanted the material rewards and privileges that the firstborn was typically entitled to. When he didn't get them, it set up a lifelong animosity between he and his brother that would never end. And feeling that the firstborn right was stolen and not as it should have been, he harbored great resentment. As God told Rebekah, this wasn't about two individuals warring in her womb. It was about two nations. One a Hebrew nation, the other a Gentile nation. All that we see happening in the Middle East today is on account of what we just read. Both sides of the ongoing battles agree on this, even though secular Western diplomats who are always attempting to find a common ground to resolve it can never quite get it right because they refuse to acknowledge the truth. An entire new religion called Islam was invented 600 years after Christ lived and died to try to reverse this truth and say that what actually happened with Isaac, Esau, and Jacob was the opposite of how the Bible portrayed it. See, our decisions can have far greater reach and longer lasting consequences, no matter our intent, than what we can imagine. And it can be for the better or the worse. Therefore, we must always humble ourselves before God and do what is right in His eyes and not in ours.
For more teaching and information, visit us online today. Come and be a part of our fellowship. Here at The Seed, enjoy worshiping and learning God's Word with us.